Hi, guys. Hope you had a good spring break. I'm going to keep it short and sweet, and we're going to talk about the Liebenberg material that you were asked to read. And in that material, we're going to cover what he called the non scientific aspects of the San Bushmen and their hunting and tracking practices. Now, non scientific, maybe from his perspective, which dates back 30 plus years ago. But from a modern scientific perspective, observing and hearing about these stories, there actually is a lot of potential for interesting research. This is going to result in an optional essay that will be worth 10 extra credit points. But the material itself, you should pay attention to because it will be referenced later on. And I'm using this as an example because it really brings together all the things I talked about in my last lecture and some of the material that was covered in the Wynne and Coolidge paper. And this is some of the description of the physical or physiological effects that the Bushmen feel when they are tracking and hunting, and they claim to know that they're going to have a successful hunt. And they describe what happens to them. And then later, Leidenberg talks about the hunting magic, rituals, and practices they engage in to ensure that they have a good hunt. So first off, I'm filming in my office. I let a friend of mine use my production studio all month, so it's a giant train wreck. So there's going to be some background noise as my toddler's downstairs and my wife's getting ready to feed him. So just bear with that. It's not real nice outside, or I'd be filming outside too. But on this, use my notes. Toddlers, fun. With the San hunters, Liebenberger reports that they claim when they're on a good hunt, they know they're going to bring home meat, they have this series or set of physiological symptoms. One is a report of an itching palm. Specifically, he says a right palm, and a burning armpits, and then sweating. And they say that if they have those effects, physical symptoms, they know they'll bring home meat. Now that's kind of interesting. In particular, I think the right hand palm itching. So what could be the causes of these effects? He says there's not any empirical research or data to support the validity of this. So, I mean, they claim if they experience these effects, they know with almost 100% certainty it's going to be a good hunt. They're not even worried about it. There's not a big data set on this. He said every time he went out with them, they claim these effects, symptoms. They did bring home meat. Okay. So there could be a bias reporting effect. It's possible that they like to remember the good times and those associated symptoms, and they kind of forget the time they had the symptoms and the hunt wasn't so good. Because right now we're really looking at something that's being described as almost an extrasensory perception, ESP, sort of non-scientific stuff. But then we're looking for the scientific nugget, or the anthropological nugget, or the evolutionary one that explains this phenomenon. Okay, so the first one might just be what we call reporting bias. Their memory is selective about whether or not they had these symptoms and they had a successful hunt. Second thing, what are the symptoms? Or more accurately, what is causing the symptoms? And when you think about what the symptoms actually are, anybody that's ever been hunting would probably describe similar symptoms as maybe the thrill of the hunt. Sometimes we refer to something called buck fever when you're hunting deer and you get in front of that one you've been stalking for years, or seeing on your game cameras and wanting to, that's the one you want, and then you finally see it with your rifle and your adrenaline takes over, and maybe you're not used to this level of adrenaline, you kind of freeze. Well, these guys don't freeze because they're so accustomed to hunting, but their adrenaline is kicking in. So it's possible the symptoms they're describing are actually hormonal. You're getting adrenaline, which is known as epinephrine, and then you have another version called norepinephrine, but it's your fight or flight response kicking in. That may result in symptoms that are being described to a Westerner who speaks English in a group by a group of people who use a click language. So the language component of this may be a factor as well. Like, what does it mean to have an itchy palm or burning armpits? Their language and the interpretation of it by Westerners who don't even vocabulary, or they don't even articulate sounds in the same way, may be a bit off. So they may be describing just basically an adrenaline rush, one that comes from where? Is it a supernatural thing? Are they just, somebody or something else is giving them these symptoms without them knowing why? They just know that it means a good hunt. Well, consider how they grow up. They are taught to learn through observation. They're taught their own scientific method of hunting and tracking from as soon as they can walk. So for them, a hunt and tracking is massive amounts of data coming in through all this learning, experience, education that they've received from their parents and from experience. And much of it requires a lot of neural processing, and this is involving multiple neural domains. So it might be sort of along the lines of what we'd call intuition. You might know something to be true through your experience, but you're not consciously thinking of all the variables and all the details and information that is informing your knowledge that this is going to happen. It's sort of like a riverboat captain, from maybe the 19th century, who's been on the waters running a paddle boat up and down and having to read the little subtle details of the bend of the Mississippi River. And yes, I'm referencing Mark Twain, if you can't figure that out. And seeing the ripples, seeing the slight undulations of the water near the curve around the bank. That riverboat captain may be able to expertly steer and navigate that craft through rough, dangerous waters multiple times. And he says, well, I'm just doing it through intuition. But he's actually doing it through technical expertise that's been developed over many years. But while he's doing it, he has to focus on the task of observing the water, feeling the water under his feet, how the boat's reacting, how the boat is moving. There's so many factors that play into navigation, particularly on the water. Water is a good example. One of the better, or another good example would be Micronesian navigators who are able to navigate great distances with like catamaran style boats. These are Pacific Islanders who can navigate with no landmarks hundreds of miles in a small catamaran boat, and they're doing it through an extraordinary series of sensory inputs, as well as technical skill and technological skill and material technology that goes along with it. So let's put it this way. navigate from one island to the next. The next island may be 200 miles. It could be cloudy. The island they're navigating to may be a mile wide. Now, this is like marksmanship. If you're shooting a rifle at 10 feet and your aim is a little bit off with how you're looking through the sights, your error on your target is only going to be a little bit off. But aim that rifle, look through the sights at a target that's 500 feet away, and your aim is just that much off in how you're seeing it. That target, your round, you're not going to hit the target. Let's put it that way. Because the error gets magnified the further you go. It's the exact same way with long distance navigation. So if you're in a little tiny craft trying to hit an island a mile or two wide, traveling hundreds of miles, your navigation has to be pretty precise, or you die. And for these guys, there's a cultural tradition of ocean marine navigation that's been scaffolded and built upon and taught over millennia. And through that experience you gain, you learn to read the water, you learn to feel the water. And one of the things that the Micronesian navigators talk about in their little handmade catamarans about navigating is they know they're getting close to an island because they can start feeling the difference of the waves under their feet and under their feet and under their seat. The boat and the lap of the waves against the boat tells them they're getting into shallower water where waves tend to get more pronounced. They also use a sense of wind. When you get near islands, you get different little weather patterns. And they have what I guess in modern terms you might describe as a mental homing beacon. Now, anybody who's done a lot of navigation, particularly of the map, compass, protractor type, not with Google Maps, might describe to you a form of a homing beacon. When they get to a new place, they kind of orient themselves to a location, and they constantly are referencing back to that location in their mind, maybe consciously, maybe subconsciously. But that's how my navigation works. I go hike a new trail. Anytime I make a turn, there's sort of a little check in my mind, like, all right, where was the start point? East. Okay, it was back that way. So I always have like I describe it as a red dot kind of blinking. And my mind's always kind of trying to orient me to that red dot. They kind of describe it in a similar fashion. But it's almost a subconscious process. So that's possibly what's going on with this feeling of excitement or whatever physical symptoms are getting. Maybe byproduct of a subconscious process. They're taking in so much information through their experience, and their body knows or is responding to what their minds are putting together in the background. We're on the right scent. We've got a good trail. We're going to have a good hunt. Adrenaline's kicking in, and they're explaining these symptoms essentially as a form of adrenaline. The fight or flight, the thrill of the hunt sort of experience. And then let's go to the next part, or possibility. One that I find actually fairly interesting. Okay, well, actually, first, there is the positive confirmation bias, which is if you think you're on a good hunt, you're going to be more confident and more likely to succeed, because a confident hunter is going to be confident in their shot, whatever shot you're taking, with spear, bow and arrow. A confident hunter is going to be confident in their choices on interpreting animal signs and tracks and spoor. Okay, and we find confirmation bias in a lot of different areas too. Make somebody think they're going to have a really good game playing baseball, playing whatever sport, and the chances are they more likely will, because you've built their confidence. All right, moving on from the confidence bias, There's another factor that may play into this, where culture, tradition, experience, and evolution have all come together. And this could be, they actually have an evolutionary difference in what their physiological responses are to certain types of internally produced hormones. And we have evidence of this in other areas. So when I was a medic on a SF team, I had two guys on my team who couldn't take Benadryl. Okay, so there's a certain percentage of the population, at least in the Western genetic groups, that don't respond to this histamine or antihistamine in the same way that everybody else does. So, whereas Benadryl, or otherwise known as diphenhydramine, attaches to certain histamine receptors, and for most of us, it makes you sleepy and groggy. I had two guys on my team, you give them the same medication, and it would do the exact opposite. So they have a genetic variation on how diphenhydramine or Benadryl attaches to these histamine receptors that creates the opposite effect of what it does for the majority of the population. It makes them wired. It amps them up. They don't get the sleepy side effects. And literally, this is just a genetic variation on hormonal metabolism, essentially. And there's a number of examples of where you get these slight genetic variations that change how people metabolize either food or hormones. I mean, you have lactose intolerant people. You have a lot of people in East Asia that aren't tolerant of alcohol. Their bodies have an allergic reaction to it because it wasn't a major part of their early culture. It wasn't something that was selected for. So these very slight little evolutionary differences and genetic differences may account for some of this. So what if, and this is a purely hypothetical speculation, the San Bushmen have been doing and performing this sort of hunting so long that their response to adrenaline, epinephrine, norepinephrine, etc., that is a logical response of getting excited, even if it's from a subconscious source, is to have these very particular effects. The sweaty right palm, or itching right palm, burning armpits, sweating. What if that was an example of a very microevolution byproduct of culture, adaptation, affect, behavioral response to environmental conditions? How did they become so proficient at living in such a difficult environment? And so those are the questions I want you to ponder. Think of the possible reasons why they have these symptoms, whether you think they're even real or not real. And then I want you to provide an example in your life or in modern society, it doesn't have to be literally about you, of where an activity, given a long enough time period, might select for this. And I'll go ahead and take the riverboat, paddle boat steamer from the 19th century captain out of the equation, so don't use that example. And the other one I'm going to take out of the equation for you guys is baseball, and if anybody, or softball. If you've played either, you sort of intuitively know when you've hit a home run before the ball has really even left the infield. If you're batting, you hit, and you know that ball is destined to escape the fence. You've hit a home run. I've talked to a lot of people who've played baseball, mostly, that I've spoken with. They know intuitively as soon as they hit the ball. They know they've hit a home run. Now, how would they know that? Is it magic? Is this? No, it's not magic. It's a level of intuition that comes from experience, where you have this embodied experience where all these factors come together and you can predict an outcome based off your subconscious, basically calculating multiple trajectories and variables and inputs. So the essay assignment is 400, 600 words. Write about something in our modern world that would create a similar circumstance to what Liebenberg is describing with the Bushmen and their physical symptoms they report when they know they're going to have a good hunt. Other than that, I will post a study guide for the next quiz on Sunday night. And have a good weekend.